Good afternoon. Please. My name is Heath Carter. I'm an associate professor of history here at Valparaiso University and one of the co-chairs of this afternoon's, of today's Martin Luther King Day celebration. We are delighted that you've joined us. It is our 29th annual Martin Luther King Day celebration here at Valparaiso University. We have an exciting program ahead for this convocation and are going to begin with a series of prayers by Valparaiso University students and staff representing some of the different faith traditions present on our campus.
Good afternoon. My name is Katie Karstensen, and I will be offering a prayer from the Christian tradition. Please join me. Loving and compassionate God, thank you for helping us all to arrive safely today, and we ask for blessings of safe travel as we leave. We thank you for this opportunity to come together as a community, ready to learn and discuss that which is not discussed enough. Help us to continue to seek out other students on this campus who talk, think, and look differently than us, and come from different places, that we may live with and listen and learn from one another. Help us to keep our minds and our hearts open. Thank you for a campus that gives topics of race, inequality, and violence a voice so we can keep hope alive to motivate us to make a change. #Time's up, and we have a lot of difficult work to do. Guide us as we take action now, not later, to assess the problems in our society that with the help of God, we can put our efforts towards and make a difference. In your name we pray. Amen.
Hello, I am Marcy Fratkin, and I'm of the Jewish faith. Lord of peace, divine ruler, to whom peace belongs, master of peace, creator of all things, may it be thy will to put an end to war and bloodshed on earth, and to spread a great and wonderful peace over the whole world, so that nations shall not lift swords against nation, neither they learn war anymore. Help us, save us all. Let us cling tightly to the virtue of peace. Let there be a truly great peace between every person and their fellow, and between husband and wife. Let there be no discord between people in their heart. Let us never shame another person on earth, great or small. May it be granted upon us to fulfill thy commandment, love thy neighbor as thyself, with all our heart and soul and body and processions. God, who is peace, bless us with peace. Amen.
Hi, my name is Bayan Faris, and I am of the Islamic tradition. I'm going to read an Arabic verse from the Quran, and then I will translate it into English. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, in the name of God, the most merciful. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين بالقسط شهداء لله ولو على أنفسكم أو الوالدين والأقربين إن يكن غنيا أو فقيرا فالله أولى بهما فلا تتبعوا الهوى أن تعدلوا وإن تلووا أو تعرضوا فإن الله كان بما تعملون خبيرا. You who believe, uphold justice and bear witness to God, even if it is against yourselves, your parents, or your relatives. Whether the person is rich or poor, God can best take care of both. Refrain from following your own desire so that you can act justly. If you distort or neglect justice, God is fully aware of what you do. This verse teaches us many things, but of them is that before we can seek justice, before we can serve justice, before we can require justice, we ourselves have to be just. We have to work on ourselves and then engage the society surrounding us, whether that is through social reform or civic engagement. We have to begin with ourselves. I ask God to make us of those who recognize oppression and racism when we see it, and may He make us of the patient and of the just, who work to rid them from our universities, from our communities, and from our country. Amen, and God bless.
Hi, I'm Ushasri Dugyala. I'm from India. I'm from Hindu faith. Ya kundendu tusharahara varada ya shubhra vastranvita ya veena brahmachyuta shankara prakriti devai sada pujita Saman patu Saraswatim Bhagavatim Nishveta Jadyapaha. My salutations to Goddess Saraswati, who shines like the full moon, who carries in her hand a veena, who is worshipped by the Holy Trinity with a prayer to drive away all my soulfulness, who can take any form, who is the best over of all boons, and I start learning now with the prayers to her to make it very effective. Thank you. Jai Shri Ram.
Thank you, Bayan, Ushasri, Katie, and Marcy for those beautiful prayers. Year in and year out, this is an important day on our campus and in this region, as we gather to reflect on the legacy and ongoing significance of Dr. Martin Luther King's life and work. We're rapidly approaching the 50th anniversary of his 1968 assassination in Memphis, Tennessee. As we do, it's right to take stock of how far we've come and how far we have yet to go. The theme of this year's celebration is Why We Can't Wait, which we've borrowed from King's 1964 book by that name. He wrote that book as the campaign in Birmingham and across the South was heating up, threatening the very foundations of the Jim Crow order. Throughout those years, King and the movement faced off not only against arch segregationists and Ku Klux Klanners, but also against seemingly well-meaning folks who counseled patients. As he wrote in his justifiably famous letter from Birmingham jail, I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizens counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until, quote, a more convenient season. It was to them that King wrote Why We Can't Wait. With the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the nation took significant steps toward finally making good on the long-standing promise of equality under the law. But notably, King was not satisfied. Far from it. In his 1964 Nobel Prize acceptance speech, and until his death just over 3 years later, he expanded the movement's scope. The beloved community would require more than just basic civil rights for African Americans. It would not come unless Americans and people of goodwill across the world battled not only against racism, but also militarism and poverty. In 1967, at New York's storied Riverside Church, King threw caution to the wind, arguing that the war in Vietnam was, quote, but a symptom of a far deeper malady within the American spirit. In 1968 Memphis, he brought a crowd of striking sanitation workers to their feet, asking, what does it profit a man to be able to eat at an integrated lunch counter if he doesn't have enough money to buy a hamburger? What does it profit one to have access to the hotels of our cities and the hotels of our highways when we don't earn enough money to take our family on vacation? 50 years later, the struggle against racism, poverty, and militarism continues. We're not there yet. If Dr. King was with us today, I'm confident he would want us to approach this day not only as a celebration of what's past, but also as a catalyst for what's to come. May a spirit of openness to new possibilities infuse this convocation and spill over from this day into the months to come. Now I'd like to invite Dr. Mark Heckler, Valparaiso University's 18th president, to the podium to deliver his opening remarks.
Thank you, Professor Carter. Good afternoon, everyone. You made it. Fantastic. So you braved the roads and you braved the slippery sidewalks, and we're thrilled that you're here because it could have been a lot easier for you to just hole up at home today. So thank you for being here. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. So it was 1954, and President Dwight D. Eisenhower was addressing the Second Assembly of the World Council on Churches. And he said, I have two kinds of problems, the urgent and the important. The urgent are really not important, and the important are really never urgent. And those comments were turned into something called the Eisenhower Principle. The Eisenhower Principle is a 4-box matrix. On one end of the matrix is the importance, relative importance. The other side of the matrix is relative urgency. And so you get kind of 4 boxes, right? You get the important and urgent, the important and not urgent, the not important but urgent, and the not important and not urgent. Now, Eisenhower defined urgent issues as ones that demanded his immediate attention, ones that typically meant putting one's time and energy towards solving another person's goals, but something that distracted from what was important, that is, what he felt was important, both personally and professionally. So for Eisenhower, he thought the sweet spot was something he called important and not urgent. So it's everything he wanted to get done, but he had all the time in the world to do it. That was his favorite spot to live and work in. And for those of us that have to juggle a lot of tasks and are constantly dealing with lots of things coming in to deal with from day to day, a lot of us use this matrix, which is called the Eisenhower Principle, to think about how to sort our work. And when I think about Martin Luther King Jr., and I think about his work, he was somebody who willingly and tirelessly spent his entire life in the important and urgent category, the most stressful, the most difficult. That's where he lived, because he recognized that this country was in a perpetual crisis with regard to race relations and social justice and equality. And he was a man who believed unequivocally that these crises facing the United States could be overcome by nonviolence, by love, with peace. He's a man who committed his life to teaching our nation how to judge people, in his words, not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And he's a man who died a violent death, murdered in pursuit of these important and urgent ideals for a country that he loved. He is, in my estimation, a leader the caliber of which we have not seen in this nation for the past half-century. For 32 years, the U.S. calendar has included a day in January to commemorate the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., both the man and the movement he inspired. But Dr. King's convictions about the equality of humankind and his staunch belief in the necessity for legal and social systems that include and support all people, regardless of their race or their social or economic status or background, are not ideas that we can simply relegate to one day out of the year. Dr. King was not a person who believed that there was a right time to pursue justice. No, he believed instead that the time is always right to do what is right. Dr. King saw the darkness, the confusion and fear that pervaded society in his day, and he pursued avenues for bringing light and understanding and freedom to those in need. And this is something we try to do at Valparaiso University, to bring that light and understanding and freedom to this campus and to our surrounding community and to the world. And perhaps now more than ever, it is imperative that Valpo be a place where people from different racial and ethnic and economic and religious and political and philosophical backgrounds can come together and peacefully and respectfully talk and dialogue with one another and learn from one another. And for this reason, Valparaiso University commits this day off every year as a day on to pursue Dr. King's important and urgent vision for our country and for the world. And as Professor Carter said, it is a vision that has yet to be fully realized. Before we begin our ceremonies today, I'd like to introduce some special guests who are with us today, and I want to thank them publicly for being here. I'd like to invite each one of them to stand and be recognized and ask that we hold our applause until all of our guests have been introduced. First, our graduate and the mayor and leader of our city, Mayor John Costas, and our city administrator for the city of Valparaiso, Bill Oding, and representing our U.S. Senator Joe Donnelly, Justin Mount. So thank you for being with us today. You didn't have to be here either, and we know that, and we appreciate you being with us. Although our Senator, Joe Donnelly, was unable to be with us today, we were very honored to receive a letter from his office in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And he wrote this: Dr. King dedicated his life to making the world and our country a more just and equal place. He inspired a nation to expect more from one another and treat others how we would want to be treated. And by embodying these values today, we can help shape a better world for our children and the generations to come. We each have a role to play and can make a difference. And in Indiana, we know that we can accomplish more when we work together. We're thankful to Senator Donnelly for his leadership and for sharing his thoughts with us today. So as you heard, the theme for today's MLK celebration is Why We Can't Wait. And today, as we reflect on the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., we could finish that statement a lot of ways. Why we can't wait for justice, why we can't wait for peace, why we can't wait for change. Decades may have passed, but you know, those statements still ring true for us today. And as Professor Carter mentioned, this theme reflects the title of a book Dr. King published in 1964, and in that book he uses his famous letter from Birmingham jail as its unifying core. And he discusses why 1963 was what was the beginning of what he referred to as the Negro Revolution, a visible eruption of nonviolent protests and peaceful pushback against the myriad ways African Americans had been marginalized by United States policy and by the society at large. Revolution. Now that's a pretty provocative word. It's one it brings to mind these moments in history that are full of dissension and division and war. It conjures up images of violence and fear. But you know as well as I do that his vision, Dr. King's vision, was a different one. He believed that a revolution could occur in our society without violence. And he called upon those wishing to engender change to protest peacefully. But make no mistake, Dr. King also believed that revolution was necessary. In fact, he once said, a social movement that only moves people is just a revolt. A movement that changes both people and institutions is a revolution. Now note that Dr. King didn't see partial change as sufficient. Changing people's minds and words and hearts were not enough. Rather, King sought to shift the social infrastructure, the very institutions that underpin society. Those had to change too. Now, people are sometimes drawn to this idea of revolution, particularly in times of injustice or inequality, because revolution promises this total change. We're going to wipe out the old and we're going to bring in the new. Revolution is motivated by the shared belief that there's something problematic going on in society, and it could be negative human behavior, it could be an oppressive government system, but whatever's going on, it's got to be replaced by something entirely new. in order to improve the situation. It, in essence, tries to eliminate what has been, and it runs headlong toward what's perceived to be better. And revolution has this sense of urgency, like it's going to happen tomorrow. There's going to be this change. It's going to be immediate. The revolutionary thinks, I'm no longer willing to accept what's in front of me. I recognize there's a problem, and now I've got to be part of creating a solution. But revolution, my friends, presents a lot of unknowns. They're big unknowns. And revolution is fraught with danger. People die in revolutions. Many people like the idea of revolutionary change, but they really don't like the reality of change. Because revolutionary change affects everyone, personally. And face it, we all like our routines. We like that sense of the comfort of where we are, the way things are. So if there's going to be a revolution, let it change everybody else. I don't want to change. And that's where we run into trouble. Revolution is hard to achieve because of this sense of personal comfort, even when privilege has granted that comfort and denied it to somebody else. Yet we look at Dr. King and what he was able to accomplish in a relatively short period of time, and we see grand moments, we see towering achievements, we see words that school children can recite by heart, from I Have a Dream to the March on Washington and Selma. And we are reminded that changing people's minds and hearts and altering institutions at the scale of Dr. King's vision will not occur overnight, will never occur overnight. His vision will and is a revolution that will take generations. Those of us in this room will grow old and will die, and generations coming after us will pick up that torch and will continue to move toward the forces of justice and peace and equality. So what ought we to think about today's theme, why we can't wait? When Dr. King himself believed that the arc of the moral universe is long and it bends toward justice. Well, you might well be thinking, I understand why we can't wait for peace and for justice and equality, but really, what can I do? I'm just a person. Now, Dr. King answered that question with his own question. He once said, life's most persistent and urgent question is this: what are you doing for others? What are you doing for others? Put that question in the important and urgent category in your life. It's a simple question, but it's a wonderful guide when things seem overwhelming and the way forward seems uncertain. So if you feel daunted by all there is to do, or unsure of the role that you might play in this necessary lifelong revolution for peace and justice and equality, then let this question, what are you doing for others, propel your next move. It is by focusing on the needs of others that we will all begin to take the measurable steps toward a peaceful and just society. When we seek to serve our neighbors, we acknowledge their dignity and humanity. When we eliminate injustice within our own sphere of influence, we chip away at prejudice and fear, those two barriers that so often separate us from one another. And when we help those around us who cannot help themselves, we remind ourselves and others about the inherent value of every person. So today, we are gathered here to celebrate one man who was laser-focused on the important and the urgent, who sparked a movement, who changed the world by continually asking and answering that question, what are you doing for others? And it would be easy to look at the life and the work of Dr. King and see him as a one-man show, that lone hero who single-handedly altered the course of history. But Dr. King never could have achieved what he did without thousands of people who were willing to undertake actions within their sphere of influence, day in and day out, year after year. And that's why we can't wait. It has been a half a century, and the metastasizing forces of ignorance and fear and narcissism are asserting themselves in disturbing and pervasive ways. We cannot wait for another Dr. King to appear on the horizon. Each of us must consider what we will do to help others today, tomorrow, next week, next year. This is our call to action on this day. And at Valpo, we answer that call to action. We seek to be a campus of dialogue and sharing and understanding, these crucial building blocks that Dr. King found to be of such importance. And just as Dr. King believed that peace and justice worked hand in hand with faith and with Christian love, at Valpo we also embrace our identity as a university at the intersection of faith and intellect, at the nexus of Athens and Jerusalem, as a crucial part of this work. And it is at this nexus that we hear the words of Jesus, who said, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." So couple Jesus' command with Dr. King, who said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And we are therefore called to love one another and to refuse to accept injustice in our world. And we too, each one of us here in this room, enter the important and urgent quadrant that fueled Dr. King's work. So during the focus sessions this morning, I hope you engaged or had the opportunity to engage with the conversations that we had around race and poverty, labor reform, sexual assault, gender-based violence, student activism, and police brutality. Within each of these challenging concerns are these opportunities to answer, what am I doing for others? And to contribute to Dr. King's vision of a just society. And I pray that the conversations you have this morning will be more than conversations, and that this place will continue to be a place where Dr. King's legacy flourishes, not this day only, but every day. We are honored to have Nicole Hannah-Jones with us. Nicole, thank you. I encourage all of you to listen carefully to her insights and to benefit from her wisdom. She has a unique perspective. She has undertaken extensive writing and research, and she has personal experiences that will contribute to an important message that she has to share with us today about how best to combat ignorance, darkness, and injustice right at home. Nicole, again, thank you for being with us today. Now I'll invite you to stand and to join alumna Carolyn Merriweather Colquitt in singing Lift Every Voice and Sing, the words of which you'll see in your program. And then following the hymn, we'll ask you to be seated as students from the Office of Multicultural Programs will offer a recitation titled Two Voices. Please stand.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmony of liberty. Let our rejoicings rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that sing a song full of the hope that brought us, facing the rising sun have come over a way that the tears has been watered. We have come treading a path through the blood of slaughter. Out of the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the bright gleam of a bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, God who has thus was thus far wrong. Thou who hast by thy might led us into the light. Lest our feet stray from the places, God, where we met thee. Lest our heart, drunk with the wine of the world, we get thee. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land.
Dr. King taught us the importance of using our voices. If the power of life and death is in the tongue, then the voice must be able to access eternity. The voice carries the pain of the past, the pride of the present, and the hope of the future. Only our words can convey the truth combined with a story that lives past the physical into the spiritual. It was one word, hope, that carried the hearts of a nation that finally elected its first black president. It was Cesar Chavez that used his voice to say, "Si se puede," to chip away at an unfair labor system that took advantage of the most vulnerable people. It was with her voice that Lorraine Hansberry answered the provocative question asked by Langston Hughes, what happens to a dream deferred, in her play, A Raisin in the Sun. It was the voice of Mamie Till that told the world, "I want the world to see what I have seen," that caused the open casket to open minds. Yes, indeed, the voice has the power to change the world we live in. But first, we must find our voice. Where do we find our voice? We find our voice in the songs that remind us that we shall overcome. We find our voice by listening to the great choir of civil rights leaders and everyday people that say separate is not equal. We all have a right to vote and to vote safely, and that fair housing is a right for all. We find our voice on days like today when we have the opportunity to educate our ignorance, encourage our timidity, and strengthen our resolve by listening to the words and the voice of Dr. King that cries freedom from the past into our future. Listen to what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has to say today.
Racism has plagued our country since the beginning. Before a Declaration of Independence or the Constitution, our country shaped the most decisive narrative. Who was human and who was chattel was created, and the haves and have-nots were reaffirmed in our founding documents. Dr. King said, "The problem of racial injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved without radical redistribution of political and economic power. People of color are still underrepresented in our bodies of the government, school leadership structures, and economic holdings. This lack of diversity in representation has led to distrust, separatism, and disdain between races of people. Dr. King has warned us that racism can very well be that corrosive evil that will bring down the curtain of Western civilization. We cannot wait to seek solutions to this issue. In a nation where people are still trying to prove their humanity by saying that their lives matter, we must use our voices to condemn the hate and bigotry of any kind.
There are many reasons why we can't wait for economic equity and fair wages. One of the scariest aspects of living in this incredible nation is the fact that you could end up not being able to feed yourself even though you work 40 hours a week. Dr. King reminds us that in this nation, it is a crime for people to live in this rich nation and receive starvation wages. Toward the end of his life, Dr. King started to speak out on the manner in which we treat our poor. The correlation between race and poverty is extremely concerning. Dr. King says, "It is a cruel joke to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps." As a nation, we have become guilty of penalizing the poor and giving grace to the greedy. But right before Dr. King was assassinated almost 50 years ago, he gave this sober reminder. So often we overlook the work and the significance of those who are not in professional jobs, of those who are not in the so-called big jobs. But let me say to you tonight that whenever you are engaged in work that serves humanity and is for the building of humanity, it has dignity and it has worth. And like all jobs that have dignity and worth, we cannot wait for them to be compensated in the same manner.
The urgency of peace and peaceful people has never had as high of a demand as it does in our contemporary context. Violence and war seems to have normalized their terror in our current climate. It was once said that in war, truth is the first casualty. As the truth is traded for the fear is traded for the power. Dr. King's words ring even louder. It is no longer a choice between violence and nonviolence. It is either nonviolence or non-existence. I believe King is correct. We are consumed by violence at home and abroad, and it is leading to our destruction. A Greek philosopher said, "In war, fathers are supposed to bury their sons." If we think carefully and analyze our situations, we are burying our children daily. A misguided war on drugs, counter-life gun laws, violence against young black males, and the dismantling of the healthcare and education systems. We are burying our children in their futures daily. But in some situations, we are not aware of it. Dr. King denounced this use of violence and believed a nation that continues to, year after year, to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual doom. We can't wait for the next war to talk about an everlasting peace.
This raises an even more important question. Would America sacrifice its wars to produce a better future for itself? In America this year, we will spend 9 times more on defense than we will on education and 34 times more than we will on justice. What messages are we sending our youth and students in this country? A young Martin Luther King explains that we must remember that intelligence is not enough. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. Where is our character and sense of moral direction? One of the strongest components to upward mobility, having an engaged electorate, and developing an adequate workforce is through education. Our children cannot wait as we pay more attention to taking life than we do to improving it. Our communities cannot wait as one of the bedrocks of the community, the school, begins to become dilapidated and our teachers struggle to provide the basic needs for their students. Our future cannot wait for us to believe that education is more important than war and have a shift in our priorities to fund them better. We need the voices of teachers, administrators, and parents to say education is important. We must move as a community away from fear as our guiding principle to love being our ultimate goal. It is only in love that we create a preferred future that reflects the highest of our values and removes the tragedy of our fears.
Dr. King speaks to us today. He says, "We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given to the oppressor, given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see that justice too long delayed is justice denied. Perhaps it is easy for those of us who have never been oppressed to be quiet at such a time as this. But for those who see their children getting the short end of the stick in a flawed education system, when families and communities grieve at the loss of another unarmed individual at the hand of those who are charged to protect us, when the poverty and unemployment rates amongst minoritized communities continue to rise, when dreamers are daily in fear of what could happen to their status in America, when a pipeline leaks after warnings that it could harm a people's water supply, when individuals in high places rather put down poorer countries and poorer people instead of putting down their phone and trying to help, when a student struggles to pay for college and all while experiencing the pain of microaggressions, max and academic freedom, then you will understand why we cannot wait. Similar to Dr. King, it is easy to become frustrated and with the contemporary social and political moderates that tell us to wait and be patient and trust the process. The process has failed us too many times and has left us malnourished and disenfranchised in this American context. And just like Dr. King, our disappointment is not from the actions of the KKK or the alt-right, but rather the inaction of the moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you with the goal you tried to seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom. The call today is for each of you to not only find your voice, but to use it, whether it is writing or singing, speaking, drawing, marching, recording, sharing, tweeting, blogging, taking a knee, or whatever you find your voice in. From today on out, you must use your voice.
To speak truth to power.
You must use your voice.
To give hope to the hopeless.
You must use your voice.
To call out oppressive forces.
You must use your voice.
To protect those who cannot protect themselves.
For like Dr. King said, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. We found a way to use our voices. We can't wait for you to use yours.
Amen. Since 1995, Valparaiso University has presented its Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Award to individuals and groups within the Valpo community who have made significant and lasting contributions to creating an environment where diversity is honored and respected here on campus and well beyond it. You can find the names of previous award winners in today's program, and some of these award winners are with us today. So I would just ask for our previous MLK award winners to please stand so we can recognize and honor you. This year, I'm delighted to announce that the 2018 Martin Luther King Jr. Award will be presented to two recipients who have made significant efforts to promote racial and religious equality throughout our community and in the region in some remarkable ways. The 2018 Martin Luther King Jr. Award is presented to Tatiana Hurtado, lecturer in foreign languages and co-director of the Summer Global Leadership Institute and a Valpo alumna. Our second Martin Luther King Jr. Award winner is Jeffrey Heron, Associate Professor of Law and the Michael and Diane Swigert Teaching Fellow. We will begin with Professor Hurtado. Today, we'll recognize Tatiana Hurtado for the exemplary contribution she has made to Valparaiso University and to the city of Valparaiso. As the director of the Summer Smart Summer Fun program and the Summer Global Leadership Institute, Tatiana has created a bridge between the university and our community. Summer Smart Summer Fun brings K through 8 grade students to campus for a 2-week experience, learning from teachers and university staff, and the Summer Global Leadership Institute gives high school and college students from the United States and all around the world a chance to spend 2 weeks on campus developing leadership and communication skills, as well as engaging with topics of diversity, equality, and activism. Professor Hurtado also sits on the City of Valparaiso Human Relations Council and was a central part of the formation of the city's 2017 Human Rights Ordinance. In addition, Tatiana is an accomplished teacher, an influential mentor, and an individual who pursues opportunities to inspire, guide, and teach. Professor Hurtado, today we honor you with the 2018 Martin Luther King Jr. Award in recognition of your contributions to the Valparaiso University community and your success in living out Dr. King's vision for peace, equality, and social justice. Congratulations. And now we'll recognize Professor Jeffrey Heron. Today, we recognize Professor Jeffrey Heron for his influential work as a law professor and immigration lawyer. Jeff uses his considerable legal talents to defend and protect his own clients, as well as inspiring his students to do the same. Whether he is winning asylum cases, rushing to the aid of DACA recipients, or listening to the stories of those who come seeking help from our satellite immigration clinic in Chicago, where he works, Jeff truly embodies all that Dr. King stood for: patience, tenacity, compassion, diligence. His passion and work have found purpose in guiding his clients through the often convoluted path of due process, and he's modeled the principles of peace, justice, and equality all along the way. Professor Heron, today we honor you with the 2018 Martin Luther King Jr. Award in recognition of your contributions to the Valparaiso University community and your success in living out Dr. King's vision for peace, equality, and social justice. Congratulations. One more photo. "1995 was the first year that Valparaiso University presented the inaugural Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Award. And the recipient that year is sitting here on the stage with me, Lou Jean Walton, Valpo alumna, class of 1960, who joined Valpo's faculty in 1970 and served the university with distinction for more than 35 years. Would Lou Jean Walton please join me at the podium? There you go. Today, we are very pleased to recognize Professor Walton for her outstanding dedication to Valparaiso University and to the Valparaiso community. But before I do that, she has a fan club that's here to honor her today. Would you all stand so that we can just recognize you? They've come from all over the country to be here today. In addition to Professor Walton's exemplary service to Valpo's social work department, she served as a volunteer for numerous local nonprofit agencies, including the Caring Place, the Domestic Relations Council of Lake County, Jobs for the Disabled, the Open Housing Commission of Gary, and the Lutheran Human Relations Association. And here at Valparaiso University, Professor Walton served as the advisor to the Black Student Organization and on the Advisory Council for Multiracial Concerns. Again, she received the first ever MLK Award in recognition of advocacy on issues involving race, gender, social class, economic opportunity, and justice. Professor Walton, today we publicly honor your legacy of leadership and service in perpetuity by establishing a scholarship program in your honor, the Lou Jean Walton Scholars Program. Through this scholarship program, Valparaiso University and its students will always strive to fulfill what you taught so many, that we must deal with improving the lives of people. Congratulations, Lou Jean. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Valparaiso University alumna Valerie Caldwell, who will perform My Living Shall Not Be in Vain as a tribute to Professor Walton, accompanied by Carolyn Merriweather Colquitt. Please join me in welcoming them.
If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word or song, if I can show somebody who is traveling wrong, then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. if I can do my duty as a Christian ought, if I can bring back beauty in this old world upraught, if I can spread love's message as the Master, just like he taught, then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. No. Shall not be in vain. If I can help just one somebody as I pass along, oh Lord, then my living, then Eugene's living, then our living shall not be in
Is that all right? Amen. Yes, indeed. Thank you so much for blessing us. Thank you for blessing this place, Professor Eugene. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Byron Martin. I'm the director of the Office of Multicultural Programs here at Valparaiso University and one of this year's co-chairs for the MLK Day celebration. I stand before you with the distinct pleasure of introducing our speaker for our 29th annual Martin Luther King Convocation. To do anything for 29 years is incredible. It demonstrates passion, persistence, and purpose. 29 years ago, there was a passion that sprung from a group of people to celebrate justice and fairness by commemorating the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Many of those folks who are proudly here with us today galvanized their thoughts, their resources, and their voices to begin a tradition at Valparaiso University unlike any other. This day, and more specifically this event, the Convocation, has acted as a lightning rod to encourage and enlighten people to persist in their pursuit of a just society. It is this pursuit that sits at the core of our university motto, "In thy light we see light." Our common pursuit of truth is more than just a saying. It is our purpose, our why, our reason for being. There is no doubt that our speaker for today embodies these same characteristics. Her masterful ability to shed light on dark situations in dark places is nothing short of powerful and places her squarely in the same prophetic tradition as Dr. King and makes her an excellent example and speaker for this year's theme, Why We Can't Wait. Nicole Hannah-Jones is an investigative journalist that covers racial injustice for the New York Times Magazine and has spent years chronicling the way official policy has been created and maintains racial segregation in housing and schools. She has written extensively on the history of racism and inequality, school resegregation, and the disarray of hundreds of desegregation orders and the decades-long failure of the federal government to enforce the landmark 1968 Fair Housing Act. She is currently writing a book on the school segregation called The Problem We All Live With, to be published on the One World imprint of Penguin and Random House. Through her writing, Nicole Hannah-Jones has persistently and eloquently stood in the gap and created by painful and difficult situations, has provided fearless analysis that can inform and equip her readers to battle unfair policies. For her work in this area, she has earned several awards, including the Hillman Prize for Magazine Journalism for her New York Times Magazine cover story, Choosing a School for My Daughter in a Segregated City. In 2016, she was awarded a George Polk Award for radio reporting for her This American Life story, The Problem We All Live With, and her piece, Worlds Apart, in the New York Times Magazine won a 2017 National Magazine Award for journalism that illuminates issues of national importance. She was named Journalist of the Year by the National Association of Black Journalists and was also named to the Route 100. Her reporting has won Deadline Club Awards, Online Journalism Awards, the Sigma Delta Chi Award for Public Service, and Fred M. Heisinger Grand Prize for Distinguished Education Reporting, the Emerson College President's Award for Civic Leadership, and was a finalist for the National Magazine Award. She's done a lot, folks. In 2016, Nicole helped found the Ida B. Wells Society for Investigative Reporting, a training and mentorship organization geared toward increasing the number of investigative reporters of color. Last year, Nicole Hannah-Jones was named a MacArthur Fellow, one of only 24 globally, for her writing on modern-day civil rights for the New York Times Magazine. Her widely read articles on segregated housing in schools, as well as her deeply personal reports on the Black experience in America, expose how racial inequality is maintained through official policy. They also offer a compelling case for greater equity. Our speaker today is truly using her voice to change our nation right now. We could not ask for a more dynamic person to speak on the topic of why we can't wait. I am happy to introduce to some and present to others the 2017 MacArthur Fellow, Nicole Hannah-Jones.
Good afternoon. Before I start, I just have to shout out the students one more time, if we could give them a hand. I think we sometimes need a reminder that the Civil Rights Revolution was led by students, that it was students who quit college to lead the Freedom Rides. John Lewis and Diane Nash quit college in order to lead the Freedom Rides. It was college students at North Carolina A&T that started the sit-ins. And so I think you guys were just such a powerful reminder of that, and our future is in good hands. So thank you so much. We're gathered here today to commemorate Martin Luther King Jr., who was one of the greatest and most important fighters for civil and human rights in the history of the world. It is a time of the year where people like to do symbolic marches or engage in a day of service or attend convocations such as this. And we often dust off the I Have a Dream speech and focus particularly on one passage. And that's the passage where Dr. King says, "I have a dream that one day my 4 little children will live in a nation where they will not be judged by the by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." And then he goes on with that run about letting freedom ring. Let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, and that we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, free at last. We read that and we feel good. We feel progress and we feel hope. And these are not bad things. But in some ways, this very particular and narrow rendering of Dr. King has become a form of anesthesia. It has numbed us. It has given us a false sense that things are okay. We would rather think about King the dreamer than the king who wanted fundamental social change and a reordering of our society. We have turned Dr. King into a convenient caricature and repurposed him to promote an image of racial progress that simply does not exist. So I'm not here today gathered in this hall to talk about the homogenized Dr. King. I'm not here to comfort you with stories of progress. I'm here to talk about the King we'd rather forget and the work we would rather not do. You see, Dr. King did talk about a dream in his speech, but in that very same speech, Dr. King also said these words. He said, "We have come to our nation's capital to cash a check." When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men and white men, will be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then he goes on to say that it is obvious today that America has defaulted on that promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, he said, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which is come back marked insufficient funds. 1963, he said, is not the end, but a beginning. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his full citizenship rights. We somehow don't want to remember that part of the speech. When my daughter brings home her worksheets from school on Dr. King, she only ever talks about the dream. Except in my household, we talk about a lot more. As King said, 1963 was not an end, but a beginning. Dr. King gave that speech on the March on Washington, but Dr. King would go on to live another 5 years and give dozens more speeches. And so we must consider why it is that that is the only speech that most of us are ever taught, and that is the only part of the speech that most of us ever focus on. If we really want to commemorate Dr. King, I would argue that we need to focus on a speech he gave in 1968, a few weeks before he was assassinated. He gave this speech not down south in Alabama or Montgomery. He gave this speech in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, which until 10 years previously had a point system in its real estate transactions that assigned points to anybody who wanted to move into that town. And if you were white, you got a certain amount of points, and if you were black, you automatically got 0. That's how racial segregation was created. If you know your history, you know the year before 1968, Detroit erupted in the most expensive and one of the most deadly riots in the history of our country. And cities had been burning all across the North. So that is where Dr. King came and traveled to give his speech a few weeks before he died. And that speech was called The Other America. And what he said in that speech is there are two Americas. One America is a beautiful situation. In this America, millions of people have the milk of prosperity and the honey of equality flowing to them. This America is a habitat of millions of people who have food and material necessities for their bodies, culture and education for their minds, freedom and human dignity for their spirits. In this America, children grow up in the sunlight of opportunity. And then he goes on to say that there is another America. And this other America has a daily ugliness about it that transforms the buoyancy of hope into the fatigue of despair. In this other America, he said, millions of people are forced to live in vermin-filled, distressed housing conditions where they do not have the privilege of having wall-to-wall carpet, but all too often they end up with wall-to-wall roaches and rats. In this other America, King said, thousands of young people are deprived of an opportunity to get an adequate education. Every year, thousands finish high school reading at a 7th, 8th, and sometimes 9th grade level. Not because they're dumb, Dr. King said, but because the schools are so inadequate and so overcrowded, so devoid of quality and so segregated that the best of these minds can never come out. In this other America, Dr. King said, the vast majority of Negroes in America find themselves perishing on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material wealth. And then he critiques this country. And he says there must be a recognition on the part of everybody in this nation that America is still a racist country. He says that we will never solve the problem of racism until there is a recognition of the fact that racism still stands at the center of so much of our nation, and we must see racism for what it is. Imagine how different our commemorations would be if we focused on that. Somehow we have convinced ourselves that this is far in the distant past, and we become so anxious to mark progress. Dr. King was assassinated in 1968. That's just 8 years before I was born. I'm 41 years old, yet 10 years before I was born, it was legal to deny Black people the right to check out a book at the library. It was legal to deny Black people the right to swim at a public school. It was legal to deny Black people the right to sit in a restaurant or stay at a hotel. 10 years before I was born, it was legal to deny Black people in the South the right to vote, to deny Black people the right to rent or buy a home. And 9 years before my birth, it was illegal for my parents, one who was white and one who was Black, to be married in 16 states in this country. So think about that for a minute. 9 years before I was born, it was illegal for me to even exist in large swaths of this country. This is not ancient history. My dad was born on a sharecropping farm in Greenwood, Mississippi in 1946, at a time when Black people in that state and most of the country had, as the Supreme Court ruled in 1857, no rights for which a white man was bound to respect. My generation is the first generation in the history of this country of Black people who have had full legal rights. I want us to pause and reflect on that for a second. I'm 41 years old, and mine is the first generation of Black Americans in this country, the country of our birth, who had full legal rights. It was not only the country of our birth, but the country of our grandparents' birth, and our great-grandparents' birth, and our great-great-grandparents whose forced labor built this country. Yet someone could come to this land from somewhere else and immediately have more rights than those of us whose ancestors had been here for generations. And so yes, of course, it is important for us to mark progress. And considering that mine is the first generation of Black Americans with full legal rights in this country, we have actually made a tremendous amount of progress. I am, as they say, my ancestors' wildest dreams. I remember as a child going to the courthouse with my dad when my grandmother worked as a custodian, and I would watch her, bent over, cleaning windows, as people streamed in and out by her as if she didn't exist. My family story is the story of so many of you gathered in this room today. My grandmother's family were sharecroppers on the farm of the white family that had once also owned that land when it was worked by slaves. When my grandmother was just 3 years old, she loaded her 3 young children on a train bound for the north with nothing but a suitcase and a box of cold fried chicken that she was going to use to feed her family until she got north. She joined that swell of humanity, that swell of black humanity, who left the South in hopes of meeting and finding the promised land. And it became the Great Migration. And those of you who know how the migration works, you know the migration followed the train lines. So wherever the train was in the South, wherever it headed to in the North is where we ended up. Now, the train in Greenwood, Mississippi was the Illinois Central Rail Line, which traveled up and went through Chicago. Our family ended up in Waterloo, Iowa. Now, this is probably not true, but I always say my family was so country that when they got to Waterloo, they thought they had hit the big city and they got off the train too early. I'm sure that's not true, but I do believe it. That's the story I tell at least whenever I get the inevitable question, there's black people in Iowa? Yes. We're not all related. So my grandmother, like so many others, she heard that the North was the promised land, that black people could come up north and finally, if they worked hard, enjoy all of the opportunities that anyone else had. She believed that she would be able to leave behind the brutality of the racism that only allowed women like her to be domestics or sharecroppers. And she would no longer have to deal with the degradation of Jim Crow. But of course, we all know that's not what was true. That when black families crossed the Mason-Dixon line, they left behind Jim Crow for its northern cousin, John. In Indiana, in Iowa, in Ohio, in Michigan, just like down south, there were restaurants that did not serve black people. There were hotels where black people couldn't sleep. There were jobs that black people couldn't get. My grandmother ended up being a domestic because it didn't matter. That was what black women were allowed to do. There were neighborhoods where black people still couldn't live and schools where black people couldn't attend. This was the other America that Dr. King was talking about. And it wasn't about the South. He was talking about all of these northern cities that were exploding with riots, even as this country was passing some of the greatest civil rights legislation we had seen since the end of slavery. Black communities in Detroit and Watts and Newark and Chicago were rioting, even as we were getting the greatest expansion of rights. But as we know, those laws were designed to make the South behave, and had little effect on the conditions of segregation that black people experienced in the North, where racism was not dictated by law, but it was just as vicious. It is this other America that I saw from a very young age. I literally watched it through the windows of my school bus, which picked me and dozens of other black kids up every day from the black side of town and bused us to the white side of town so that we could desegregate those schools. Now, I remember thinking back then, why did the houses start getting nicer once we crossed the river into the white side of town? Why did their roads seem to get fixed? Why did that side of town have more than liquor stores and convenience stores, but shopping centers and restaurants and places that you could actually purchase things that were good for your body? And then I noticed how my new white school had so many more resources than the segregated school I was leaving behind. Now back then I didn't know enough to question why I had to ride the bus 2 hours every day just to get a quality education. But it was having this front row seat to inequality that made me start to feel a very sharp sense of injustice in the world and that things shouldn't be like they are. Now, I know it's going to be really hard for you guys to believe because I'm so fabulous now. But I was a pretty nerdy kid. I was actually just weird. I watched the news obsessively. I read voraciously. I ordered Time magazine when I was starting in the 6th grade. and I started to read all of the history I could get my hands on. Because I wanted to understand why things were like they were. And I saw how the media largely portrayed Black people. I saw the narrative that told us that Black people were poor and they were living in these neighborhoods that were neglected because Black people simply refused to work hard and that we just didn't want any better. And then I'd look at my own family, where every day my aunts and uncles would come home dirty and exhausted with their joints swollen, sometimes so badly that they couldn't make a fist because they had spent hours and hours working in grueling factory work, or in the chicken plants, or in a beef packing plant, doing back-breaking work every day, and despite working so hard that it ruined their bodies, they never ever were able to get ahead. So I knew, because I saw, that the narrative that white America and white media put out about Black people just wasn't true. And so, understanding that it wasn't true, I wanted to understand, why was it like this? So I began to read every piece of history that I could get my hands on. I took the only Black Studies class that was offered at my high school. It was one semester because clearly you can tell the entire history of African civilization in one semester. And it was taught by the only Black male teacher I ever had in 13 years of public school education, and his name was Mr. Ray Dial. And it was in that class where I first began to read books about Black people and by Black people and tracing our history. And I became angry because all these years, when all we had been taught was the only thing Black people had ever been is owned by someone else, and there was this whole history out there that someone could have told us, and they didn't, and I came to understand that that was intentional. That if you know this history, then you question your circumstance. But if you don't, then you believe what they say about you. So I became obsessed with studying history. And if you come to my house, then you know I'm obsessed still. My house is full of books, and all of them historical, so much so that my mom buys me fiction because she thinks I need to lighten up. And I began really to truly understand the power of the media in shaping the images of our communities. So one day I went to Mr. Dial, my African American Studies teacher, and I complained to him about our high school newspaper. And I said, our high school paper never writes about the kids like me who are bused from the Black side of town into the school. And he said, well, Nicole, if you don't like it, either join the newspaper or shut up about it. If anyone knows me, again, you know, I never back down from a challenge. So I joined the paper. I was the only Black journalist on my high school staff, and I started a column called From the African Perspective. My very first investigation was whether or not Jesus was Black. Now, I can tell you, I couldn't definitively prove that he was Black, but I could certainly prove he wasn't blonde with blue eyes, and that was really the point anyway. So, and then I went on to write a story about kids like me who were being bussed in and all of the stereotypes that we faced in the school and all the stereotypes that people who lived on our side of town faced. And I won my very first journalism award from the Iowa High School Press Association. And after that, I was hooked. I knew I wanted to become a journalist, that I would tell our stories, that I would do as was written on the front page of the North Star, which was the very first African-American newspaper founded by Frederick Douglass. And what they said was, we wish to plead our own case. Too long have others spoken for us. So every day in my work, I catalog the other America. It is in that other America where I spend my time in segregated, discarded communities, in segregated classrooms that are under-resourced and look like Brown v. Board of Education never happened. Where Black people daily, Black children daily, are being deprived of the education that we have promised them. I spend my days interviewing the boys and girls and men and women forced to live in this other America. And then I try to tell their stories so that we are forced to confront the inequality that we sustain. You see, we all want to believe we would have been on the right side of history. That's why we love Dr. King now. We say we would have supported him. But the truth, I think, is much less certain. By the time of his death, Dr. King had lost almost all of the support he had amongst white Americans. The very white allies who had stood by his side when he condemned Jim Crow in the South turned their backs on him when he began to condemn racism and segregation in the North. It was on a cold January day in 1966 that Dr. King moved his family into a $90 a month tenement in Chicago, one of the most racially segregated cities in this nation. He launched the Chicago Movement Campaign in an effort to show the particular segregation and racism of the North, which came through the creation of ghettos. The difference in the North was you didn't have to pass laws. If you contained black people in a ghetto, then you didn't have to worry about your schools being integrated or your restaurants being integrated or your parks being integrated, because those people simply could never get access to them in the first place. So Dr. King began holding marches and going through all-white neighborhoods, and then he met a familiar foe, the same types of vicious white mob violence that he had faced down south. When Dr. King led 800 marchers through Marquette Park, they were attacked by an angry mob that threw bricks at them, and rocks, and eggs, and firecrackers, and someone struck Dr. King in the head, opening up a gash, as they shouted, "Kill him, kill him, kill him." King would later tell the reporters, "I've been hit so many times, I'm immune to it. But I have to do this to expose myself, to bring this hate to the open." Polls show at the time of Dr. King's death, the majority of Americans held a negative view of him. And if you read the things that were said about Dr. King when we were fighting to make this day a national holiday, you would be appalled. Called him everything but a man of God. So we must sit with the fact that this year does not commemorate the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's death, but of his assassination. We love this man so much that we killed him. So has there been progress? Yes, of course. My grandmother, when she stooped over the cotton plant, she could not have imagined that one day her granddaughter would work at the New York Times. A year ago, I stood in a packed convention hall in Chicago, shoulder to shoulder with a rainbow of America, listening to the farewell speech of the first black president. Our ancestors could not have imagined such a thing. We lived to see a man descended from a race of people who were brought to these shores in shackles, ascend to the highest office in the land. And then we live to see him succeeded by a president who espouses open white supremacy, a man who called the countries of our ancestors shitholes. President Obama was the exception. Donald Trump is the correction. As Dr. King said, America is a fundamentally racist country, and Donald Trump simply returned this country to its natural state. You see, it's easy to condemn Donald Trump. It's easy to say we aren't like him. But the inequalities and injustices that I write about existed before Donald Trump, and they're going to exist after. In communities all across the country, some of the most egregious segregation in housing and schools can be found in the most progressive, liberal-leaning northern cities. All of the most segregated school districts are in the North, not the South. This is why Dr. King reserved some of his most searing critiques for the white moderates and progressives. And what he said was, the white liberal must see that the Negro needs not only love, but justice. It's not enough to say we love Negroes and have many Negro friends. They must demand justice for Negroes, because love that does not satisfy justice is no love at all. It is merely, he said, a sentimental affection, little more than what would have for a pet. Then he goes on to say, the fact is that there has never been any single solid, determined commitment on the part of the vast majority of white Americans to genuine equality for Negroes. 50 years after King's assassination, Our schools have resegregated. Black children are more likely to attend segregated schools than they were 40 years ago. The black unemployment rate remains twice that of white Americans, even in the best economy. The average white household has 12 times the wealth of black families. And black Americans experience millions of instances of housing discrimination every year, so much so that a poor white family lives in a wealthier neighborhood than your typical middle-class black family. There are more black men in prison now than there were black men enslaved during slavery. And each year there are more black men killed by police than black men killed at the height of lynching in this country. These things are not true because this is a country full of rabid racists. It is true because people who say they believe in equality and justice every day act in ways that sustain inequality and injustice. So yes, there has been great progress. All our ancestors could ever hope would be that their sacrifice would lead to something greater, that we would be able to have the freedoms and opportunities that they were denied. And so hope is important. I can't imagine what hope led my grandmother without a husband or a job to leave those cotton fields and come north. But she did that. But much more than hope, we need action. We need to not just espouse values of equality and justice, but to actually live those values. We must stop accepting that this other America has to exist, and we must be honest. For equality to come, those who have always had in this country are going to have to give something up. How different would my life have been had I not been part of a busing program that got me out of my segregated failing schools and into a quality school? Would I even be standing here before you today? How many children are just like I was, who have potential, who have intellect, who have ambition, but because of their circumstances, our schools are not helping them escape their condition, but instead ensuring that they never will? How long did we squander the potential of our children? Children should not have to succeed in spite of the obstacles. We created this inequality, and we can undo it. But as King said, what we need is not love, but justice. We don't need people who say they care about equality. We need people who act to make sure equality will come. Thank you. I can't say I'm convinced we would do that. And if you know me, well, I'm convinced that we won't. But I imagine that's not why y'all invited me, huh? I'm not convinced. But every day I go about my work, and I see the consequences of our actions. I see the consequences in children who have gotten to high school and cannot read. I see in the consequences of the little girl I interviewed in Detroit who told me, I used to want to be a nurse, but I can't read and I know that I can't. So I'll just have to get a job. This wasn't a girl who didn't have ambition. This was a girl who faced reality. And so we either are going to deal with the consequences of our original sin, or we're going to sustain the system. But what my work says is I'm not going to let us pretend that we're not making a choice, because we choose it. Some days it's hard. It's exhausting. It's painful to look in the eyes of children who you know we've already determined don't deserve the same future that we want for our own children. But I keep going because I must, and we all must. So I'm going to leave on a somewhat hopeful note. Because people often ask me, if you don't think things are going to change, why do you keep doing what you do? And I think too, during the civil rights movement, could they ever have imagined that they could topple a system of apartheid in this country? But they did. And so I'll leave us today with the words of another great black man, James Baldwin. And I keep these words on my phone, and I look at them every day. And what he says is that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. Thank you all.
Wow. Hopefully you're full right now. Yeah. Thank you, Nicole, for telling the truth and speaking truth to power in this place today. As we get ready to draw to a conclusion, I'm going to ask my co-chair, Heath Carter, to help escort Nicole to the meet and greet that we'll have here shortly. First, this day would not be possible without the help of so many people. I would like to acknowledge several folks. First, we would like to acknowledge our administration here at Valparaiso University. They are incredible leadership that allow us to do this day each year and support it in such a tremendous way. So I would like to thank our president, Mark Heckler, Dr. Mark Heckler, our provost, Dr. Mark Bierman, and I would like to thank our assistant provost for inclusion, who's not able to be here with us today due to a loss in the family, Dr. Stacy Miller. Through their leadership, we can continue to have this day, and that's important, and we thank them for that. We want to thank our donors. There's so many people that give in such a healthy way to make this day possible, to make sure that you all are here and you have programs and the day keeps going. We want to thank our donors that have helped us. We want to thank the city of Valparaiso, who's represented by the Honorable Mayor John Costas and City Administrator Bill Oding. Thank you for being with us today. We want to thank Lakeshore Public Media, their representative, their president and CEO, James Muhammad, who they did a tremendous in-kind donation to help us with our media and our production across the entire Northwest Indiana region. We want to thank the Porter County Foundation. We want to thank Hopner, Wagner, and Evans Law Firm. We want to thank First Source Bank and their regional vice president, Matt Vesley. We want to thank Shive Hattery and their representative, Jeffrey Lewis. We want to thank them for all that they do to help us make this day possible. We also have donors and folks that give right here in our institution. We want to thank our College of Nursing and Health Professions and Dean Karen Allen. We want to thank our College of Engineering and Dean Eric Johnson. We want to thank Christ College and Dean Jenny Pro. We want to thank VU Department of Education and their chair, Kevin Gary. And we want to have a special thank you for the Institute of Leadership and Service and their director, Elizabeth Lynn. Thank you all for making this day possible. We want to thank all of the speakers that were here today, not just Nicole Hannah-Jones, but there are several anchor speakers and other people that participated in the focus sessions. If you participated in a focus session or spoke early this morning, we want you to stand, and we just want to say thank you for bringing the powerful content to our experience here today. Thank you. We want to thank our student prayer leaders and our OMP students who delivered the recitation. We want to thank them for leading us in that way. Those are powerful students that are doing some powerful things. And we thank them for that. Selfishly, I'd like to thank my O&P staff for having my back and making sure that I got things done when I was supposed to get them done, so I appreciate my staff. We want to thank our facilities management for doing their best to keep the snow off the sidewalk and trying to make it as we're getting inches last night. We want to thank the staff of the Harvey Union for making sure that our rooms are ready to go. We want to thank our dining staff. If you had lunch today, you had a tremendous lunch. We want to thank dining for that. We want to thank IMC for helping us produce and promote this entire event. We want to thank University Events and staff, and we want to thank the staff for the Center of the Arts for making sure those rooms were ready, and we want to thank the chapel staff that helped us turn this space into Convocation space, and thank you for everything that they've done. We'd like to thank Director Jeff Dobler and the concert band for all they do, and they've done this for 25 years. They've played intro and exit music. We want to thank them for that. Might be 26 years now. We thank you for that. Last but not least, I want to thank and ask that our MLK Celebration Committee, I'm going to ask you to please stand. So, while you see Heath and I up here and doing all the talking, these folks have done such an incredible job thinking about everything that could go wrong, everything that's supposed to go right, and planning and making sure, talking to the speakers, making the tracks, making the PowerPoints, saying, Byron, you've lost your mind. There's no way we can do that, and still finding a way to get it done. They do so much incredible work, and they don't get paid. This is not their daily job. This is something they do in addition to their job. So if you tack this on, they're probably working like 80 hours a week instead of the traditional 40, trying to make MLK Day what it is. And we are so thankful to them. Thank you so much for making this possible. I'd also like to take the time to thank my other co-chair, Dr. Heath Carter. He's such a good friend, and he's been a friend since I got here. And I'm supposed to say nice things about Heath, but if you know Heath, then you know that you don't need to say nice things about him, because he's doing incredible work, and he lets his work speak for himself, especially in this community, and we're forever grateful for his presence in this space. It is impossible to change something that you are not willing to acknowledge its existence. Today, we have experienced and have to acknowledge the existence that our world is not always fair. Our world is not always just, and our world does not always reflect the dream of Dr. King. Today, we heard some things that are difficult. They're hard to hear. Today, the mirror was put up to our face, and we saw that everything wasn't right. And so when we acknowledge what we experience in this place, in this country, in our current context, we have to tell the truth about ourselves. We haven't done enough. We haven't done enough. When we look in the mirror, we know we have more work to do. We know that individually we haven't taken the steps that we need to take. We know socially we haven't galvanized ourselves to speak truth to power, to give hope to the hopeless, to extend hand of justice to those who are unjustly treated. We have not done enough. And so, like the students, I challenge you today, when you leave this place, this is not just a time for us to get together and cheerlead and say how far we come. This is actually a time for us to get together and acknowledge that we're going to continue to work until we get there. And just because we're not there yet doesn't mean that we're not going to get there. But we'll never get there if we think we've arrived. We're not there yet, Valparaiso University. We're not there yet, Valparaiso, the city. We're not there yet, Porter County. We're not there yet, Northwest Indiana. We're not there yet, Indiana. We're not there yet, Midwest region. We're not there yet, United States of America. We have work to do. So I invite you to join so many people that are doing that work and continue to fight for a just society. Thank you for coming to Martin Luther King Day Celebration 2018. Thank you.